Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema podcast. Today, I want to get into education. Educating our youth, educating ourselves. You know, the overall theme of this podcast is the transformative effect of Torah on each of us. But it brings in a new question, and that is, what is the role and the balance of secular wisdom? I grew up in a secular world, where what mattered most was going to college so you could be well educated to enter the professional world and succeed in order to have a good livelihood. But I still get to this question. What is the role of secular education if Torah contains all the wisdom of the Almighty? Are there subjects that are counter to Torah that we should avoid? Are there subjects that are just a waste of time? I think about subjects I took in college, like psychology, sociology, very important subjects, but I found that Torah, God's wisdom, from the one who made us, that the wisdom in Torah in the area of psychology and sociology is a source I would want to go to for learning those subjects versus the outside world as they've scrambled to test and come up with ideas and theories, prove those theories wrong. And even if they have gotten to the conclusion that is accurate, that's in sync with Torah, why start with them when we can just get that wisdom directly from Torah? It's a good question, and it's one I wanted an answer to. So I asked one of our leading educators, one of the pillars of this community, Rabbi Nagel, to come on. He's going to clarify all this for all of us.
Welcome to the Shema podcast, the podcast for the perplexed, where Torah insights, intertwined through personal stories as well as interviews with leading Torah scholars, demonstrate the empowering qualities of Torah and mitzvot. For more great Torah learning through Torch, the Torah Outreach Center of Houston, go to torchweb.org. Now to the show.
Rabbi Nagel, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking forward to getting into this subject with you.
It is truly an honor. Again, I enjoyed so much and actually passed along the last podcast to my family members, and they actually enjoyed it very much. So,
excellent.
It's an honor.
Okay, so tell us about the subject. You know, I framed it, the balance. Is there a balance? Is the balance differ per individual? Is there subjects that are prohibitive to learn because for either A, there's a waste of time. Like we used to make a joke in college, like to boost up your GPA, you would take something like underwater basket weaving and just some of the nonsense you would see on the curriculum, right? It's a waste of time, or it's philosophy that's very counter to Torah and could create problems for a Jew. How do we navigate that? And then the other thing I was asking about was, if someone says, yes, I want to be a doctor, how do you navigate the college world these days? Because you see what's happening on campuses, and it's so anti-Torah that I'd be horrified to send my daughter off to an environment like that. So let's begin. Tell us what we need to know.
Okay, so let's try and give a little framework. Okay, there's a few sources, and I guess the best place to start is at the sources. And from the sources, that's where the different opinions, and like I mentioned in our pre-discussion here, that you're going to speak to 5 rabbis, you'll get 10 opinions on this topic, because every rabbi has a bit of a different nuance, and depending on where the rabbi sits in the gamut of orthodoxy, even within orthodoxy, there's very different sides on that. Many people will shy away from anything in that area at all, and there are many rabbis that would feel that to some degree it is appropriate, and then there's rabbis who just welcome it with open arms. And therefore, really, what we need to do is start from the source material, and from there you see where the ideas develop, different avenues develop. Let's talk about what is prohibited. There's a fascinating account in the Talmud, and I'll give you a little bit of background. The Talmud discusses about how the walls ended up being breached, the walls of Jerusalem. And this is very interesting. It was internal battle amongst the Hashmonai kings, who should be the king. And, the Jews, when they fight against each other, it's a different level of dirty. Okay? It's unfortunate, but it was really bad. And there was one king on the outside, one on the inside. But they both were, serving and they made a wall around. They didn't let anything get passed in to the city. Now, of course, they had karbanos that need to be brought. So what was the system? It was a bribery system. The people inside had a lot of money, and they would send over a bucket full of money, and in exchange, they got the requisite animals that they needed for the korban. And there was one elderly gentleman there who was well-versed in the wisdom of the Greeks, Chachmas Yavanis. And he basically said, as long as you're passing through those animals that they're still able to bring their karbanos, you'll never win the battle. The only way to win is by not accepting the bribery and just don't send in animals. And what happened is that they took the money, and in exchange, they put a pig in the basket to be hauled back in, and the pig stuck its hoofs into the wall, and it made such a loud sound that was just resounding. And it was at that time that the rabbis decreed that anybody who teaches, how terrible it is to teach any of our children Chachmas Yavanis. So that's one source. What is Chachmas Yavanis? What is the wisdom of the Greeks? What is the depth of that story is a good question. But this is one of the source material of beware of this form of knowledge. But it's more than just a form of knowledge. It was a tactic. It was, you need to break the people on the inside. It was a brilliant tactic when you think about it. Part of what's keeping them going and withstanding the siege is because they're still able to function inside by bringing the karbanos that they need on a daily basis. And by breaking that, that's how you'll win. It was a tactic. It was war tactics. But the blame fell on this idea of Chachmas Yavanis. On the other hand, we do find that it's a little less than clear. We find that Rabbi Gamliel, who was the Nasi, he needed to be well versed because he dealt on a regular basis. He was basically the temporal leader of the Jewish people. He dealt with various dignitaries. He needed to be well versed in these areas. So, for the need, there was an overriding consideration that sort of allowed him to make an exception to study these areas of wisdom, this area of wisdom. So that's an area, whatever it means. Maybe it means philosophy. Maybe it means, war tactics. Maybe it means something. To me, there's something nefarious in the whole idea of being self-centered to attack, or not caring about the greater good of the Jewish people. There was a lot of things that was at play in that wisdom, but that area was definitely viewed as and decided at that moment to be considered extremely negative and prohibited. So that's one area. What I would say, fall into that category as well, is a lot of the courses that you find in a college that are completely antithetical to Torah, that are just blatant antithetical to Torah. Obviously, we understand that one should not study idolatry as a course. Of course, his history of idolatry is actually maybe okay, but in terms of what are you doing? What are you trying to learn there? It's not just that, but I'm saying on a lot of philosophies might fall into belief systems that are going to be antithetical to the Torah. So that's another area.
Okay. So when I was in high school, I know we learned Greek mythology, which at one point was the idols of the Greeks. I don't know why they were teaching it to us, maybe just from the historical narrative of it. But would that be considered prohibitive?
I'm not going to issue any kind of ruling of here. I'm just telling you, I'll tell you my own viewpoint that that's not really what's being referred to. Okay? Greek mythology is just that. It's stories, it's legends. There may be some positive lessons, maybe not positive lessons. I find that who we call our God and who the Gentiles call their gods is completely telling in terms of, instead of putting God on just a high level that we should strive towards to emulate, which is our belief, they pull their gods down to very base human feelings and human emotions and bring the gods down to their level. Basically, it's a bunch of jealousy, lust, and that's basically what their gods are dealing with. Okay, they may have a lot of strengths and powers, but they're all full and all dealing with these same base human emotions, human frailties that we suffer with, which I find very telling. Now, I don't know, is that Chachmas Yavanis, the Greek mythology? It depends how it's being studied, I would say. If you're just learning to know what it is, a historical thing, so it's learning history, that's maybe different than trying to actually delve into it and trying to develop a real deeper understanding of that wisdom and what it's a different thing. So I honestly, I really not sure that that's at all what's being referred to here, but to me, it's just like cute stories at the level that's in high school. It's just cute stories, and nobody really gives it too much of a big deal. And sometimes you have to realize, and this is another thought, you have to be really careful in prohibiting things, because sometimes just by prohibiting it, you kind of sort of create an interest. Ooh, I can't learn that. That's exactly what I want to study. So I think they might prohibit the Torah. That's what it was in history. And then it's like, well, if they're prohibiting it, must be there's something to it. You know what I'm saying? That gave our drive to want to learn Torah even higher. So it's fascinating how things are the opposite. This is, I would say, probably the broad camp of Orthodox Jewry will put the general category of secular knowledge for the sake of being gainfully employed, to have a skill that's clean and easy. So, and that's, a degree in accounting, for instance. So, there is nothing really questionable about the material. It's just a way of, keeping books. Again, obviously, if you're learning how to cheat a system, that might be more of an issue. But I'm talking about in simple, just understanding some of these basic principles that are just, there's a knowledge there that's there for the sake of getting a skill, that you could get a job, that you could be gainfully employed, and that most people would not really have a problem with that area of knowledge being pursued and studied. It's when you start crossing into questionable areas, maybe like the philosophy classes, and then there's other areas. I mean, I remember my sister was, thought that she was in college, she would take an art class. I figured, okay, it would be nice. And the next thing you knew, that there was a naked woman who you had to do a portrait of. And that's standard in colleges. That's certainly not appropriate for a yeshiva bacher to be studying, obviously, for obvious reasons. Yeah. And that's something that the colleges have, there really is a goal to some degree of trying to, quote unquote, normalize the people and with their level of, it's not, and again, it might change in a very Christian college. It may, in a way, may be a lot better in terms of that area, except the fact that in theology, they push a certain theology, and they want you to actually understand Christian theology, which is itself, it could be a lot of problems. So the point being is, what I'm driving at is that there's definitely courses that you're going to find that are quite difficult to navigate. That's just the course material. The bigger problem in colleges today is nothing to do with what you're learning in the classroom. It's the lifestyle of the college. Yes. And anybody who's been to, I haven't been to college, but anybody who's been to, especially these destination colleges, not a commuter college, but the ones that you're actually expected to live on campus, it's not just learning Greek philosophy, it's sort of living the hedonistic lifestyle. That's what it's all about. And somehow they're supposed to be learning while they're getting drunk every night, partying, complete promiscuity. There is no prohibited thing that's being that's not being touted as and driven, and everyone's fighting. All the different groups are trying to say that we have the wildest parties. Come to our join our fraternity. And that's what it's all about. And it's I can't believe, why, where did that have to do with, getting educated? I mean, seriously, that's the place of knowledge. This is what knowledge is all about. This is just satisfying desires. It's all it is. And that's the bigger problem. And, and that's something that is, in my mind, that has nothing to do with the question of secular knowledge. That has to do with living a secular lifestyle.
No, look, I went to college. I spent my first 2 years at University of Texas before transferring to University of Houston when I was working at Lehman Brothers. And I know there is today a ranking system on the best partying schools. And a lot of my friends chose their college based off that metric. I know that was my focus my first 2 years, which is why I realized I needed to work during the day and go to school at night and get away from that whole party scene, because that's all it was. It was the thoughts of my daughter. There was no way I would send her into such an environment.
And that's really, I'm sure, there was a huge difference between University of Texas and University of Houston. University of Houston is a commuter college. Nobody's dorming. I'm sure there might have been some, but it's a very, very different environment. This is obviously a very strong consideration, but it's not really cutting to the core question if you're asking about the secular knowledge. So again, so one thing we saw so far is the Chachmas Yavanis is definitely a no-no, whatever that means, and that's what you're going to find. What does that mean? And you'll find differing rabbis have differing understandings of what's being referred to there. Now, let's talk about just pure wisdom. Let's say the maths or, geometry, science, medicine. What about that? So the Talmud discusses these areas as well. And it talks more in the realm of learning a trade, learning omnus. Okay, and there's a big discussion, and it's very important to learn a skill. And the rabbis also have a dispute on that. What's the right way to go? In other words, we find this a major dispute between Rabbi Gamliel, who says, Yafa Talmud Torah im derech eretz. That Talmud Torah is good when it's coupled with derech eretz, which is the way of the land, which is taken to mean, in this context, is taken to mean dealing with the world. Dealing with the world, the knowledge of the world, and developing, gaining knowledge of a skill that you'll be able to be gainfully employed. And he said, for the toil in both of them, it makes you forget about sin. You're doing a dual curriculum. You're having a Torah curriculum as well as a secular curriculum. There's just not enough time in the day to start partying. That's really the idea. And that's what it's saying. And that's the idea. The combination of having both of them is, for by and large, the point. Okay, and that's Rabbi Gamliel's take. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai disagrees vehemently. He says, no, only Torah. Only Torah. Because if you're going to be busy with the world, it will take you away from Torah. You're going to be, he says, like Torah, his line was, Torah mate'ela. What's going to be with Torah? You're going to start studying, you're working the field, you're plowing when you're plowing season, you're harvesting in harvest season. By the time you're done, you have no strength for Torah. And that's a big problem. And that's what he says. And like all these things of working the land, that's like in a way not the ideal. That's not good. The ideal is that you should just focus on your Torah, and that's a story. Now, that being said, Talmud came out with a conclusion and said, Harbe asu ke Reb Shimon Bar Yochai v'lo also bi'adam. There are many who tempted to try Reb Shimon Bar Yochai's route of just Torah, nothing else, no other area of knowledge, no other area of focus, but it just didn't work out. Okay, not everybody is cut out for that, and all the rabbis agree that it's for the select few, really. I mean, not all of the rabbis, but most of the rabbis feel, as long as you're not doing what's really prohibited, it's not for everybody. And the question is, who is it for? Is it for the greatest minds, the people who are the brightest, our best and brightest? Or is it for the people? I mean, that's an interesting question. And my take is that it's where there's the biggest will to want to, like if to me, that's the biggest judge of success in a person. It's not the person with the best brains who have just natural gifts, photographic memory. They understand everything. They understand immediately, and it comes easy to them. That's not the one who's going to make it in Torah, really. The one that's going to make it is the one who has such a strong yearning in the area of Torah. That's somebody who's going to get somewhere, in my opinion. That's how I see it. So for him, let him pursue his area of Torah, and that would be, the world would try and support that. After all, that's what we should, as a collective. In Europe, there were communities they were so poor they had no money, and they couldn't afford to send their boys to yeshiva. But they had in the younger grades, and the ones who had the most promise, everybody in the community would collect their pennies to send them off from the town to study by the great rabbis. And he was the source of promise for our community. He's going to bring pride and joy to our community. And that's why if you read the history of the various yeshivas, they were known by the name of the town they came from. Why would that be? Because the town had a hand in sending him off to yeshiva to help sponsor him, to help pay for his because they didn't have the money for it. They couldn't afford to send all of them to yeshiva.
Right.
So the ones with the most promise, so they were like, and when they would come home, this is Rabbi Greenblatt, who, I don't know if you met him, but who recently just passed away. He shared with me a story that in Lithuania, when the boy came home for, let's say, Passover break, so they made a huge party. Everyone dressed up in their Shabbos clothes. The entire town would come out, and they would carry this boy in as the pride and joy of their community, who was the one with the most promise, and welcome him back to town.
Wow!
Can you imagine that drive? So all the kids, I don't know if you can realize what kind of drive that created in the students to want to achieve that kind of appreciation. And that was the way the system was all the years of Europe before the World War I, which really tore apart Europe completely, and everything fell apart, to some degree. But that was the system, and that was what it was like. So, as far as gaining basic knowledge to earn a parnasa, that was the reality of life for most people. We live in a completely different world now. And I think part of the question that you have to sort of think about is like, it's just so different, and how does this apply nowadays? So many ways of making a parnasa nowadays that didn't exist in the past. In the past, the person who got a degree, he would have a job, and the world that we live in, it's very different.
Yes.
I'll explain it. It's completely different. And therefore, I think a lot of these things that we took for granted need to be reapproached and thought about and say, well, I understand we need parnasa, we need a way that my son should be educated to be able to find the means to make a living, but it's just different. And you got to sort of recognize the strength of the child, recognize the will, where the will lies, and these are the things you got to take into account.
Okay, so one of the things seems like Torah sort of favors in the area of livelihood is one that does not require a lot of intellectual engagement, more physical, so that the mind can be engaged in Torah while they're attaining their livelihood, like farming, for instance. The patriarchs were shepherds.
That's an interesting thing. When you look at the Gemara, there's a tractate of Kiddushin, which talks about the mitzvahs that a father has for his child. One of them is to educate his child to have a skill. And it goes through, at the end of the Masechta, talks about the various jobs that are good or bad. Not a fan of doctors. It says, Tov sheberofim legedim, the best of the doctors should go to hell, basically, or belong in hell. That's very strong. You're like, why not? Well, it's like only the good doctors. The bad doctors are fine. It's the good doctors, they know too much, or they think they know everything. There's varying opinions of how to understand that. And obviously, everybody's an exception. But the Talmud is also not a fan of shepherds, by and large, because most shepherds were very tempted to allow their flocks to graze on other people's property. There was theft that was involved. Okay. And it was a big issue. It was a very big issue all the way back in the Bible. In the Torah, we find the dispute between Lot's shepherds and Avram's shepherds.
Right.
Whether to muzzle their animals. This is, it's an ancient question.
Yeah.
It doesn't say it outright. Okay, it doesn't really say it outright that it should be. They give examples of the skill, like examples of a skill is like fine needlework, like a tailor or something like that. Was something that it's a skill that's clean and easy, not something that's too strenuous, not something that's going to knock you out too much. But it doesn't mean that you can occupy your mind at the same time or not. You need to focus on what you're doing. I don't think, if you're distracted, thinking about a very difficult esoteric thing, you're not necessarily going to do a good job in what you're doing.
Right, exactly.
So we're not necessarily saying that. But that's interesting where it pushes in the area of which jobs to take, what's good, what's bad. Obviously, a job where a man is very involved with women, that can lead to problems. If you're single, right. If you're not married, it can be. Talks about somebody who's like a dressmaker, a man who's a dressmaker or something like that. So he's very much involved in, like in an area where it's not necessarily going to be modest with the women that he's dealing with. Right. And that's an issue. And it talks about a single man who is not allowed to take certain jobs where, the mothers are bringing their child, and there might be some opportunity for them to do something inappropriate. So again, there's an idea of drawing lines and barriers so that you avoid these types of pitfalls. That's the kind of thing that they talk about. I guess the most telling Gemara is it's a Mishnah actually there that talks about don't worry so much about what it is that you're going to do, because the success comes from God.
Right, that's what I was going to get at. It's not, a lot of people choose profession based off, there's better margins in it, and that's where people make more money. That's not true, because God can give whatever parnasa he wants to whomever, regardless of what his trade is, right?
That is true, but I will tell you one thing. It's an interesting, I guess there's a conflict there, okay? There's a way of the world, though, how things work. It's not, don't expect that if you're an Uber driver, you're going to be making more money than a doctor, okay? You know what I'm saying?
Right, yes, you're right.
And you say, it's all from God, so why do I have to go through 8 years or 10 years of schooling, whatever, and residency and everything?
Right.
I'm just going to do the easy job of whatever, just something that I don't need any training for, and that's how I'm going to make my money. It's going to be, what I'm saying? That's, a little, that's not what it means.
Right, okay, because you don't want God creating miracles. And so obviously it would be a miracle for an Uber driver to make $5 million 1 year. Right? It's logistically impossible.
Exactly. So we live in a world that there's a certain reality of the world, and you can expect that God's going to change the order of creation. That being said, the scary part is that, some gamers are making more money than doctors, okay? So it's pretty crazy.
Right, exactly.
That's I can't imagine a more useless job than being a gamer, okay? But not anything against anybody who does that for a living, but I'm just saying.
Right, yeah.
It's what are you doing with your life? And to me, that's to me the core question. It's a person needs to feel that he was put in this world for a purpose. And it's not just so that you make ends meet at the end of the month. You have certain natural talents that God wants you to bring out. And that's part of what you need to look for in what profession you choose, something that's going to deal with, connect to who you are as a person.
Right.
And that's the kind of area you want to go, you're going to want to look towards. To bring honor of heaven to this world. You know what I'm saying? If you feel like a natural inclination to the area of, social work or something like that, and that you can, it's a job and you could help people in there, and you have a talent in that area, so that's a great thing. And I would certainly consider that appropriate. You know what I'm saying? If again, but some people, it's hard to find what their talents are in.
Right.
Happens. It's I'm very mediocre at everything, so what do I do now? There is then, of course, another side that I think really needs to be discussed.
Let's do it.
This is very important. And I think we mentioned this last time, talking about Torah in general, and how the more you learn Torah, the broader knowledge you will get in all areas of knowledge. It is unbelievable how much information about how the world works, about human insight into human nature. The entire work of rabbinic law is a study in the understanding of human nature, because that's how they make their decrees, because they know human nature. There was such a strong sense of human nature, they were able to recognize where our frailties lie. All these areas, the more we study the Torah, you will have a huge bank of knowledge of so many areas of expertise. My study partner's father, he was taken to the camps in Europe, okay? And over there, if you need to have a skill set in order to survive. And he was just a yeshiva student. That's all he was. And what skills did he have? But he was very learned. And there's one tractate called Eruvin. Eruvin talks about putting a little that rope around the town. And there's a lot of areas where we talk about, when you have a different topography, how you measure the distance. So he actually studied that very well when he learned the Gemara.
Right.
And he told them that I'm a surveyor. Yes. And they said, oh, you're a surveyor? Oh, we need a surveyor. That's a very important skill. Right. And he really was able to do it because when he studied it to actually bring it to the level of real, that he's able to actually see how it works practically.
Yes.
And he was able to actually save his life by his knowledge of Torah, which converted to a skill, a knowledge that was valued by the secular world. So it's an amazing idea.
That's amazing.
Point being is that that's only one area of Torah.
Yes.
But if you think of all the areas of Torah, it touches on, Hilchos Shabbos touch on so many basic things of how to, like if I ask you, well, how do you weave? And you're like, I have no idea how they weave. How do you get, that's a very good question. How they do in and out like the whole time? So it's like, no, there's a weaving machine. But anybody who studied the Talmud will tell you, of course, it's a basic principle, and they know exactly how it's working because all of these things are part of the process. So,
wow.
So many areas of Torah are actually realia of the way the world works, and knowledge in so many areas of like basic things that you could go through college, you have no clue about 90% of this stuff.
Right.
But yeah, that's the way the world works. And to this day, it's the same principles. Winemaking is discussed in the Talmud. So many different areas of, forget about, like I said, the area of human nature is overarching in all the areas. But actual building, construction, all these things are discussed in detail in the Talmud. So it's an amazing thing. Like people say, well, how much do I deal with the secular world? Well, don't think that it's only out there.
Right.
You're only good. The more you study out there, the more you realize that, oh my goodness, it's right here in front of me in the Talmud as well.
Right. Well, I even, from my own experience, I started a practice management arm that's built on behavioral finance, which is the study of how human emotion impacts investing decisions. And I probably shouldn't say this online, but where the majority of the content I created came from was from learning Torah. Because the entire principle of Torah is to create decision architecture by learning Torah and then using that to guide the emotions around those decisions. Train the emotions, exactly. And so my colleagues were saying, like, this is great. You're coming up with all this stuff. This is great. And I would lie, and I would just name off a bunch of behavioral finance books. And they were like, this is great. You're leading the program. And so for all my listeners, don't tell anyone. That's where the majority of my contact. If you're friends with me on LinkedIn, and you're familiar with the Behavioral Investing Institute, let's keep that between us. So anyway, but yes, it's very true. But I think, it's almost like, though, if someone wants to go into a profession, right, they're not going to get the attention of future employers by saying, well, I've been studying Torah for 10 years now, and I want to work at your hedge fund, right? You got to they need their piece of paper that says this guy's competent in the areas of finance, although I would say finance is well covered in the Torah as well, is it not? Absolutely.
There's tremendous sources in the Talmud. We could go through the details whenever you're ready of seeing like just basic, a lot of economics 101, a lot of economics, higher level economics are discussed in the Torah in various places. So that's really interesting. Talmud talks about these things.
Okay, so there's really nothing Torah's lacking. I mentioned in the intro, like psychology, sociology. But what would someone do? You have a child, they want to go to college. They want to get the education to pursue a certain profession. You have kids who've gone to college. How do you navigate allowing them to get the information they want and avoid the information that would be harmful and avoid the culture in the college world?
Okay, so that's a real practical question. I just want to point one point out based on what you talked about before I get to the question. So first of all, I will have you know that law schools throughout America, they value yeshiva learning. They're very well aware that if you studied in yeshiva and you have a yeshiva degree, which really is nothing but, if they call it Talmudic law, a bachelor's in Talmudic law, they will accept that plus your LSATs grade and get into some of the best colleges, law schools in the world. Okay?
Right.
And that's because they're aware that if you study Talmud, you are a lawyer already. Okay? You get it. You understand how to outthink the other side. you see everything from multiple sides at the same time.
Yes.
And you can see the balance between the two. You're there. Okay. And therefore, it's just a matter of, well, does he have the English language skills or other things to be able to communicate in a secular world?
Right.
Which is a separate discussion. And they don't necessarily have that in yeshiva. But in terms of the acumen necessary to be a lawyer, they're head and shoulders above anything that they were training in the secular colleges.
Yes.
So that is something that, at least in that area, the secular world is aware that that's going to work. Now, as far as the practical question, first of all, I would say the most important thing is creating a very strong foundation before they're ready to go off to college, where they are immersed in Torah values first, because the world is a big, wide open world, and the only way we can fortify a person, strengthen a person, is with a very clear, powerful understanding, with deep discussing the hard questions, what Torah has to offer, and deal with the difficult questions that the world will throw their way, that they should be well armed, basically,
yes,
in battling that world. Now, that's the first thing. So, and therefore, it's very common to take a year off before college, to be fully immersed in Torah study for both boys and girls before going off to college. That's standard, in our community here and in many, many communities because of that purpose. Now, once there's a decision that, okay, well, they do want to pursue a degree of higher knowledge in various areas, so there's differing ways that you can do that while protecting the environment. There's Jewish colleges that there's a less of a concern. There's online courses, which is not ideal for certain things, but many things can be gained without being exposed to difficult circumstances.
Right.
All of those are factors. Again, like you said, going to college at night and going usually splitting the day. For boys, they would be studying daytime and nighttime, and then going to college at night. So they have that anchor of the Torah that keeps them before so that
right,
they have what to go back to. And all those things are ways that we deal with this issue.
Okay.
For girls, it's a little different because they don't really go to yeshiva anymore. But there's a big value if they're able to be home. That's very, that they're still maintaining their home environment. But again, sending to a college like the examples you gave, is fraught with danger.
Right.
There's an expression in the Talmud that talks about that exact question, and the discussion, it goes like this. It says, what are you going to say to the father who takes his son, dresses him up in finery, showers him, puts on nice cologne, gives him a wallet full of money, and sends him right out to the place where there's women who are scantily clad, and puts him on that street, and you let him hang out there.
Right.
And the father said, and the Talmud tells us, Ma yaseh haben v'lo yechta. What did you do? You gave him zero ability to counter that. What will the son do and not sin? You're like setting him up for failure. Why would you put a person in such an environment?
Right.
And that's exactly how the Talmud looks at doing those types of things. Like, why would you expect any different result? It's like, well, my son, he would never do those things. You're right. Studying in yeshiva, he would never do those things. But if you took him out of that environment and put him right in front of these people who have no morals, who are just there, and what do you expect to happen? How could you expect anything but that the child will sin?
Right. If that's what you're exposed to day in and day out, and you're interacting with kids, and that's how they're behaving and what they value is partying and promiscuity, I don't care how holy you are, it's going to wear you down over time. You're going to think, well, maybe just that will be okay. And that first thing may be okay, but eventually what ends up leading to is, yes.
And our rabbis are very, very well aware of avoiding the slippery slope.
Right.
Be preemptive, and that's really the idea. Obviously, it always takes prayer and everything as well, but there are alternatives. You don't have to do that. There's no need, especially, like I said, you have to revisit the whole question. There's a lot of ways to skin a cat nowadays, to think creatively about it.
Okay. You're saying there are options for people to go to school where there's Jewish communities?
Much more Jewish environment where some of my daughters went to different places, but they're depending on the level of religiosity. There are schools that are very fine schools, may not be the best, the big names,
right? But
you get an education and you're with an environment of other religious girls. So of course it's going to be a lot more positive. It's not co-ed, not even co-ed classes, and that's it's going to be a big difference.
You have a daughter that has graduated at this point, right, from college?
I have one daughter that graduated law school.
Okay.
I have another daughter that graduated with a degree in electrical engineering.
Okay.
City College.
Okay.
Another daughter that has a degree in computers.
Okay.
But she went to Torah, which is a Jewish school for girls. And that's a Jewish religious girls' school. Okay. That's where she graduated from. And the other daughter is currently in Queens College, Queens College is, again, a lot of religious girls are there.
Okay.
But that makes a big difference too. Okay. You have your chevra, so to speak, your friends, your group of friends, and that makes a big difference.
So at those schools, you don't run into problems where there's curriculum, they have the different options, electives, and things you need to take in order to get that degree, where some of those subject materials are not appropriate. I guess that you don't have to worry about it when you go to schools like that.
Some of them you might, and my daughters would talk to me about whether it's okay to take this course or that course. And usually if you want, there's an alternative.
Okay.
Like you can, and a lot of times they recognize their credits from the year in Israel for certain parts of those to cover for some of those prerequisites that are of questionable nature,
right?
Philosophy or something like that. Well, yeah. I took Jewish philosophy in the seminary. Can you recognize that as taking that basic? Right. What I'm saying. So that's how it works these days.
Okay, it seems to me too that the whole purpose of exile is for Jews to influence the world around us, not let them influence us, to integrate without assimilating. And why I think that it's tricky, but equipping ourselves to, well, let me just ask you, is that a correct thesis that's part of being in exile is not to seclude ourselves from the rest of the world? We're supposed to be influencing it to some degree, correct?
Right, but there's a very important lesson, and that's like you say, it's tricky.
Yeah,
which is a very good word for this to describe the issue. The idea is that barriers still need to be maintained.
Yes,
and those barriers need to be maintained to make sure that you're not the one being influenced.
Right,
and you'd be foolish to think that you're not going to be influenced. You're only influencing others.
Right.
It doesn't work that way.
Yes.
So maintaining those strict barriers, those lines that you don't cross, is crucial to maintaining that. And your ability to influence is not when you go out and party with your and say, well, I'm not having my fifth drink, only 4. That's not right. That's not how it works.
Okay.
Because once you have your 4th drink.
Right, that's a very good point.
You're not in a position to be like that.
Yes,
but when they see it's like I don't put myself in situations where I might be subject to these issues. That makes a huge difference. So I'm happy to go for a coffee, but I'm not going to the bar right now with you.
Right,
and you know what? That'll go a long way, and they'll recognize who you are and what you stand for, and you are very well aware of your weakness, and you put boundaries for yourself.
Right.
And that's the way you're influencing others.
Yes.
By not allowing yourself to fully integrate. That's the idea. That's point. To me where you do it in a way that's healthy for you and still being able to influence others in a positive way.
It makes me think of a story which will probably reinforce what you just said. Many years ago, I had someone that was always calling me up and complaining about stuff, and he wasn't even doing business with us. And I finally asked him what the issue was, and he said, well, you stopped coming to my conference. And he's like, you don't value doing business with my company. You don't show up anymore. And I explained, well, it's over the weekend, and I started keeping Shabbos. And even if you offered me millions of dollars to come there, I can't go. I would not go. He immediately flipped around to where he became my best friend. And he called me like a month later and told me how he shared that at his Sunday barbecue that he has with his friends at church. And he said, these Jewish guys get it. It's more important to them than all the money in the world. He constantly called me up and said, I share everyone with him that story, Dan. Totally respect you.
That's exactly the thing.
Yeah.
By showing the boundaries that you're adhering to and keeping strong.
Yeah.
For your value system.
Right.
That speaks volumes in ways that everyone can appreciate. And once they realize that's what's going on, obviously you have to communicate that. But once he realized that, he was blown away.
Yeah, exactly. So I didn't have to go to the conference to win him over in the end.
Right, exactly.
Okay, beautiful. I think we covered everything here, giving everyone guidance. So, Rabbi, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
It's great. Thank you so much. Pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting Torch so they can continue to spread Torah wisdom to the world by making a donation at torchweb.org and clicking donate in the top right corner of the page. And if you would like to get in contact with our host with comments, suggestions for future topics of learning, or questions for him or his guest rabbis, you may email him at president@torchweb.org.